At some point, you stopped treating enjoyment like something healthy and started treating it like something you had to justify. If a day felt too easy, you questioned it. If you relaxed before everything was done, you felt guilty. If you enjoyed yourself while life was still unfinished, part of you read that as carelessness. So responsibility stopped being about what you handled and became about how tense you stayed while handling it. You learned to trust pressure more than peace, to trust exhaustion more than ease, to trust the tight version of yourself more than the one who could actually breathe. And after a while, enjoyment started to carry a strange moral weight. Not because it was harming anyone, not because you were neglecting your life, but because somewhere along the way, you absorbed the idea that if you were really serious, really responsible, really trying, life should feel heavier than this. So now the moment something feels good, your mind goes looking for what you're forgetting. A task, a bill, a deadline, something unfinished, something that puts the pressure back where it belongs. Because for some adults, enjoyment doesn't feel like freedom. It feels irresponsible. And once that feeling gets deep enough, you can spend years confusing tension with character and guilt with proof that you still care. You can see this rule in the smallest places. In the way you sit down to rest, but never all the way. In the way a free hour immediately turns into errands, catching up, getting ahead, making use of it. In the way you can enjoy something, but only if you can explain why it was productive, meaningful, deserved. A lot of people don't know how to receive an ordinary good moment without putting it on trial first. A quiet morning becomes a question. Shouldn't you be using this better? A meal you like becomes a negotiation. Did you really need that? An evening off becomes something to optimize. Can you at least answer a few emails, clean up a little, get something done before you relax? So the problem isn't that you hate rest. It's that rest rarely arrives by itself. It arrives with a voice that says, not yet. A voice that says, once everything is handled. A voice that says, if you were really responsible, this would feel less comfortable than it does. That's the hidden rule. Enjoyment must be deserved. Ease must be justified. Free time should be used well. And if something feels too good while life is still unfinished, it becomes suspicious. You can feel that rule everywhere. In the calendar squares you keep mentally filling even on days off. In the Sunday feeling that starts before Sunday is over. In the laundry that sits unfinished long enough to make the whole house feel morally unresolved. In the coffee going cold because you never fully sat down to drink it. In the meal you technically ate but barely tasted because your mind was somewhere else. In that sentence that shows up so often it barely even sounds like a thought anymore. I should be doing something. And the strange part is, from the outside, this often looks like discipline. You're organized, dependable, hardworking. You don't let things slide. You don't indulge yourself too much. You stay on top of life. But on the inside, it doesn't feel clean like discipline. It feels charged. Like you're constantly trying to avoid becoming the kind of person you would no longer respect. A lot of adults are not afraid of hard work. They are afraid of being seen as the kind of person who enjoys life too early. Too early before the bills are handled. Too early before the house is in order. Too early before they've caught up enough, proven enough, finished enough, earned enough. So they don't rest cleanly. They rest defensively. Even enjoyment gets managed that way. You buy something you like, then immediately start building the case for why it made sense. You take a day off, but make sure it's useful enough to count. You watch a movie, but half watch it, because part of you still needs to remain on duty. You spend time with people you love, but some section of your mind stays back with the unfinished things, just to prove you haven't abandoned your responsibilities. It's not that you can't enjoy your life. It's that enjoyment keeps having to pass a character test first. And that's why balance is not a deep enough word for this. This is not just a scheduling issue. It is not just that you work too much and need more fun. The deeper problem is that constant tension has started to feel morally correct. Pressure feels responsible. Busyness feels respectable. Deprivation feels serious. And anything that softens you too soon starts to feel a little dangerous, even when nothing is actually wrong. Some people don't just lose good feelings quickly. They question them quickly. They trim them down. They dilute them before they can become too comfortable. Not because the moment is bad, because part of them still doesn't trust what it means to let a good moment stand on its own. So over time, something subtle changes. You stop asking whether something is nourishing, whether it gives you life back, whether it makes being here feel more possible, and you start asking something else. Did I earn this? Did I do enough first? Does this make me look careless? Does this still count as being a serious person? That's the rule underneath the rule. Not rest is bad. Not enjoyment is selfish. Something quieter than that. Something harder to catch. Only enjoy what you can morally explain. And if you live under that rule long enough, you can start mistaking self-denial for maturity and guilt for proof that you still care. You stopped asking whether something was nourishing and started asking whether it looked earned. That rule usually doesn't begin as an idea. It begins as a pattern. You notice very early what gets rewarded, who gets praised, who gets trusted, who gets called mature, reliable, good, and it usually isn't the person enjoying themselves too much. It's the one who helps without being asked, the one who doesn't make things harder for anyone else, the one who can carry more than they should and still keep their face steady, the one who absorbs stress cleanly, the one who doesn't need much, the one who can go without. That person gets looked at differently, more respect, more trust, sometimes more love. And if you learn that lesson early enough, responsibility stops being something you practice and starts becoming part of your identity. You don't just do what needs to be done. You become the one who can endure what other people can't. You become useful in a way that feels almost moral. At some point, being needed started to feel safer than being happy, because being needed has rules. It has structure, it gives you a role, it tells you who you are in the room. Happiness is looser than that. Enjoyment is harder to measure. It doesn't always look admirable from the outside. It doesn't always prove anything. Usefulness does. So a lot of adults grow into a strange performance without realizing it. Not a performance of success, a performance of stamina. How much they can hold, how little they require, how long they can go without rest, without softness, without complaint. And because that performance often gets rewarded, it starts to look like character. Then adult life comes in and reinforces the whole thing. The backseat of the car after work, the bills on the counter, the fluorescent office light that makes every day feel slightly unfinished, the school pickup rush, the phone that is never fully silenced, only briefly ignored, the guilt of sitting down before the house is in order. A lot of adult life does not reward peace. It rewards visible strain, being booked, being in demand, being overwhelmed but handling it, being the person who is always trying, always managing, always carrying something. And over time, that changes the emotional meaning of things. Stress starts to look serious. Exhaustion starts to look responsible. Busyness starts to look respectable. And joy, by comparison, starts to look a little flimsy, a little extra, a little frivolous, like something you can have later, once the real part of life is over. But the real part of life is never over. There is always another email, another repair, another appointment, another form, another thing to prepare for, pay for, clean up, follow through on, stay ahead of. So, if enjoyment is only allowed after everything is handled, then enjoyment gets pushed to a date that never arrives. Which is part of why so many adults do not know how to feel at ease without also feeling behind. Not because they are weak, not because they lack gratitude, because they have lived too long inside systems that confuse constant output with worth. And then there's another layer. For some people, this didn't come only from adult culture, it came from instability. If your early life felt unpredictable, calm does not automatically register as safe. If money was inconsistent, peace can feel temporary. If the emotional weather in your home changed fast, peace can feel like the moment before something turns. If criticism was common, ease can feel undeserved. If there was always something going wrong, a moment where nothing is wrong can feel less like relief and more like a gap in your awareness. Like you missed something, like you should check again, like you are getting too comfortable. That's why some people don't just struggle with rest after hard seasons. They struggle with rest because rest does not match the kind of life their body learned to prepare for. A quiet room can feel unserious. An easy day can feel suspicious. A calm stretch can feel temporary in the way clear skies feel temporary when you've learned to read your whole life around storms. So when people say things like, you just need better balance, it can miss the depth of what's happening. Because this is not always about preference. It is not always about ambition. It is not always about being a workaholic in the simple sense. Sometimes the person who cannot enjoy their life is not chasing more because they love achievement. Sometimes they are staying in motion because motion feels safer than stillness. Because strain feels more legitimate than ease. Because if they stop bracing, they no longer know what is holding them together. And that is the trap. Responsibility slowly got confused with permanent self-denial, not all at once, not in some dramatic moment, just slowly, through praise, through pressure, through adult routines that never end, through environments where composure mattered more than comfort, through years of being taught, directly or indirectly, that what makes you respectable is not what restores you. It is what you can endure without asking for much in return. So, by the time you call yourself responsible, the word may already contain more than responsibility. It may contain vigilance, suppression, preemptive guilt, a reluctance to receive anything too freely, a habit of tightening the moment life gets soft. For a lot of people, responsibility was never just about doing the right thing. It became a way of staying braced. You finish the thing. The email is sent. The room is finally quiet. And instead of relief, your body goes looking for the next problem. Something you forgot. Something still pending. Something you should get ahead of before it gets ahead of you. The danger is gone, but your chest is still lifted like it hasn't heard the news yet. The moment opens up, and instead of settling into it, your hand reaches for your phone. Not because there's a crisis. Because silence still feels like a place where something could be missed. This may not be discipline. It may be your body refusing to trust relief. Some people don't know how to rest because they were never resting. They were only collapsing between responsibilities. That feels different in the body. Rest has a softness to it, a willingness to stop scanning, a drop in muscle tension, a kind of internal permission. Collapsing is not that. Collapsing is when the body stops because it has to, but never really unclenches. You sit down, but you stay ready. You sleep, but not all the way. You take a break, but some part of you remains on call. So when people think, I'm bad at resting, that isn't always the full truth. Sometimes the deeper truth is that their nervous system got used to living in preparation mode. And when there is nothing urgent to prepare for, what they feel is not peace. They feel exposed, or blank, or vaguely guilty, or oddly restless in a moment that should feel easy. A lot of people interpret that feeling as laziness, but laziness is usually not what's happening there. What's happening is that the body has spent so long orienting around demand that the absence of demand doesn't register as safety. It registers as uncertainty. That's why relief can feel wrong, not dramatic, not terrifying in some obvious way, just wrong enough that you interrupt it before it fully lands. And often that interruption starts before the good moment even arrives. You know that voice. This won't last. Don't get too comfortable. Enjoy it, but not too much. Something always comes after this. A lot of people do this so automatically they barely notice it. They take the edge off good news before it has time to reach them. They temper excitement before it gets embarrassing. They lower expectations in advance so they won't have as far to fall. They devalue positive moments before the moment even gets a chance to become real. Not because they hate good things. Because part of them learned that fully receiving good things comes with risk. Risk of disappointment. Risk of loss. Risk of looking naive. Risk of having to feel the contrast when the moment ends. So they meet relief with suspicion. Then there is the next layer. Sometimes the good moment actually arrives. The meal is good. The day is lighter than expected. The conversation feels easy. The house is quiet. No one needs anything right this second. And instead of letting the moment deepen, you interrupt it. You think of what's unfinished. You remember a bill. You open another tab. You add guilt to the room. You distract yourself from the softness before it gets too real. Psychology has language for this. Some people automatically turn down positive feelings once they arrive. They interrupt them, distract themselves from them, contaminate them with guilt, fear, or unfinished tasks. Not because joy is shallow, because joy no longer feels safe enough to fully receive. There's a term for that pattern, positive dampening, not as a label for who you are, just as a name for something many people do without realizing it. They feel something good, and then lower the volume. They make it smaller, less vulnerable, less intoxicating, less costly if it disappears. And there is a quieter pattern underneath that too, not hating happiness, distrusting it, almost expecting good feelings to charge interest later. So the mind starts making private little bargains with itself. Don't get too excited, don't enjoy this too much, don't relax all the way. If you let yourself feel this fully, something will happen. Something will end, something will be taken, something will remind you that this was never meant to last. Sometimes the suspicion goes even deeper than that. Sometimes it isn't just good things don't last. It's good things don't belong to me. Not in words, always. Not in a dramatic confession, more like a reflex. A resistance to receiving. A need to explain why this was okay. A need to earn the pleasant thing before it can count. That's part of why enjoying your life can feel irresponsible, because underneath the guilt is often an older equation. If I haven't done enough, I shouldn't feel this good. If I haven't paid enough, I shouldn't be this relaxed. If life is still unfinished, comfort becomes morally suspicious, and the body reinforces all of it. Because joy is not just an idea, it is also a physiological state. It is the body opening, dropping some of its guard, releasing control a little, allowing breath to go deeper, letting attention widen, letting the muscles stop gripping. That sounds simple when you say it out loud, but if your system learned to survive through vigilance, opening can feel like exposure. Receiving can feel like carelessness. Softness can feel like the second before something goes wrong. Enjoyment can feel like you stopped watching the door, which means the guilt that shows up in good moments may not be moral truth at all. It may be body memory. Your guilt may not be proof that you're doing something wrong. It may be the sensation of dropping a guard you mistook for character. That's why this can feel so confusing, because from the inside, it doesn't announce itself as fear. It announces itself as responsibility, as realism, as staying sharp, as being the kind of adult who doesn't get carried away. But sometimes what you call being responsible is actually a very old form of bracing, a survival posture that made sense in environments where staying ready kept you safe, kept you useful, kept you less exposed to disappointment or criticism or chaos. And if that posture helped build your life, then of course it sounds respectable when it speaks. Of course it says, be smart. Of course it says, don't be lazy. Of course it says, stay on top of things. Of course it says, you can enjoy yourself later. But later is doing a lot of work there, because later often means never fully now, never fully here, never fully allowed, which is what makes the deepest layer of this so painful. A lot of people do not treat enjoyment like a human experience. They treat it like a permission slip, something that must be granted, approved, backed by evidence, paid for in advance. So they keep trying to become the kind of person who has finally earned the right to feel at ease, more done, more disciplined, more depleted, more beyond reproach. As if one day, life will look at them and say, all right, you've suffered enough now, you may relax. But that day rarely arrives on its own, because the standard keeps moving, the list refills, the pressure shapeshifts, and a nervous system trained to distrust relief will always find a reason to postpone it. Which means the feeling of irresponsibility is often not coming from the present moment at all. It's coming from an old association. Good feeling equals lowered guard. Lowered guard equals risk. Risk equals wrong. And once that wiring sinks deep enough, even a quiet room can feel like a test. The exhale never fully happens. The chest stays lifted after the danger is gone. The hand reaches for the phone in silence. The body stays half prepared in a life that no longer requires that level of alarm. So what you call responsibility may partly be an old survival posture that learned how to sound respectable. So maybe the question is not whether you care enough. Maybe you've been proving that for years. Maybe the real question is what, exactly you've been using as proof? Because if the only evidence you accept is tension, then peace will always look suspicious. If the only version of responsibility you trust is the one that hurts, then anything gentle will keep feeling morally incomplete. But responsibility is not the same as self-punishment. It never was. Responsibility is not how tightly you hold your body, not how quickly you ruin a good moment, not how guilty you can make yourself feel in a quiet room, not how little pleasure you allow before dragging yourself back to duty. A person can be decent, reliable, loving, serious, committed, and still let their shoulders drop. A person can answer the email, pay the bill, show up for their family, keep their word, build a real life without needing to stay internally braced every minute they're alive. Because responsibility is not constant strain. It is possible to be trustworthy without living like you're always one mistake away from becoming careless. It is possible to care deeply without turning your nervous system into collateral damage. It is possible to be an adult without making every ordinary pleasure pass through a courtroom first. And enjoyment is not negligence. A good meal is not a failure of character. An unproductive afternoon is not always avoidance. A conversation that doesn't lead anywhere useful is not wasted. A quiet moment that earns nothing, proves nothing, optimizes nothing, is not automatically a moral loss. Some people have spent so long trying to become the kind of person life can respect that they forgot to ask whether their own body can live inside the life they built. That may be the saddest version of this. Not that you worked hard, not that you took things seriously, but that you may have learned how to run a life your body never got to inhabit. A life you can manage. A life you can maintain. A life you can explain, but not a life you can fully feel. And a life your body can inhabit is not a wasted life. It is not lesser because it contains ease. It is not unserious because it contains pleasure. It is not irresponsible because there are moments in it that do not ache. Maybe the goal was never to become a person who could endure more and more without complaint. Maybe the goal was to stop confusing tension with goodness, to stop treating every pleasant moment like stolen time, to let a decent hour be decent, to let your life contain something other than proof. Not proof that you're trying, not proof that you're useful, not proof that you're still worthy of respect. Just something warm on a quiet table, evening air through a cracked window, a room with no emergency in it, no performance, no one keeping score. Just your body, finally not being punished for being alive. And if some part of this found you a little too precisely, that probably means you're not the only one who has lived this way. So, if you want, leave a comment. Not a perfect one, not a polished one. Just tell me what enjoyment tends to trigger in you first. Guilt, restlessness, suspicion, the need to earn it, something else. Sometimes, seeing your own pattern in words is the first time it becomes visible. And if this gave language to something you've carried for a long time, you can let the video know that too. A quiet like does that. It helps this kind of conversation reach the people who are still calling their exhaustion discipline. And if this is the kind of space you need sometimes, stay close. Subscribe if you want more videos that make sense of the things people usually reduce to personality flaws. Because a lot of what looks like character is really adaptation. A lot of what looks like irresponsibility is really a body that never learned it was allowed to feel safe. And a lot of what looks like weakness is just a human being getting tired of paying for their worth with tension. You are allowed to stop making your body suffer just to prove you care.